Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session for parents. This is 7 in a series of sessions that we have done for parents in the Jefferson County Public Schools. And we have covered a wide range of topics. We've talked about education for children who are gifted in the primary talent pool. We've talked about gifted children in the intermediate grades. We've talked about twice exceptional children, children who are highly creative, who show giftedness in the visual and performing arts. We've talked about twice exceptional gifted children. Many topics have been covered, and tonight we're going to wrap this series up with a session for parents where gifted students themselves are talking. I believe we called the title for this session, Gifted Children or Gifted Kids Grown Up, What Worked and What Didn't Work. And we have a wonderful panel that we will introduce to you in a few moments. But we're going to start the session tonight with a brief video from one of our students, a student from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and his name is Mario Hernandez. And this clip was done when he was a 10th grader at Warren Central High School. And he has a very wonderful story. His life has not been easy, yet he has persevered and has had many people help him along the way. And so we wanted you to hear his story.
My family is predominantly from Mexico. My mom, she came here before I was born. I was born, and then my dad, he left. My mom, she has a hearing deficiency, which doesn't allow her to speak English. She can't learn English because she doesn't understand it. So I have to speak Spanish with her, do ASL, different things like that to help her. It's taught me a lot about perseverance. In kindergarten, I had a teacher who would send me to a first grade reading and math class because she felt that I wasn't being challenged in the regular kindergarten class. So she would send me every day to work with other first grade kids in their subjects. After that, later in 5th or 6th grade, I went to Jemison 212 Academy, where I would leave the elementary school one day a week and take classes where I would do further math than I was doing at the elementary school. And I would also do different projects that would help me understand the science and the applications that I could use it for. After that, I took the ACT in 7th grade, where I would learn about VAMP, and then I would go to VAMP to be with more like-minded people like me, take advanced classes to try to further my education in the public schools. After that, in high school, I would start taking AP classes where I would really feel challenged because they're college courses where I would need to challenge myself to work harder outside of class and practice more outside of class and just do more work for myself to get a better grade. It's very important for gifted kids to be with other gifted kids. Because sometimes gifted kids don't feel understood. They can't relate to other kids. And whenever they work with other people and they can go at their own pace and they can go at the faster paces that they can learn better and faster, it helps a lot with their self-confidence and their ability to learn. My favorite class has to be AP Chemistry. It's the most challenging, and that's what I love about it. It's wonderful just to do problem solving 1 hour every day. It makes me feel better about myself.
But let me tell you just a little bit more about Mario. As you could see hear from the video, he had a teacher in kindergarten who recognized early on that he was ready for more. And then he had other teachers along the way who recognized that he could handle being pulled from his school for one day a week and going and being with other gifted children. And then he had adults in his life that advocated for him and provided scholarships and helped him participate in summer programs. And then he went to the Gatton Academy and attended there for a couple of years. And then his plans after that were to pursue a degree in computer science. And he wants to eventually get his doctorate and then he wants to start his own company for research and development into new technologies so that he can benefit people in the world. So he has a wonderful story. He was from a loving mother, but she wasn't able to help him along the way. But other people advocated for him and helped him. Plus, he advocated for himself. I'll turn this over to you now, Tracy, to introduce our panel.
I think one of my favorite parts of that is when he said how he loved chemistry the best, and something made me feel better about myself. I mean, that's what it's all about. You know, you've got a challenge, you work hard for it, and that's how we gain self-esteem, right, and confidence. I'm Tracy Inman. I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Gifted Studies, and I'm very excited to bring to you 5 grown-up gifted kids, and they all have distinct ties to Louisville. One is actually a JCPS teacher. So what I want to do is I'm just going to let them introduce themselves, and they will, of course, tell you the connection that they have to Louisville. Victoria, why don't we start with you since you're up or right on my screen?
Hi, good evening. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Victoria. I actually went to the University of Louisville for my undergrad degree. I got a degree in history and political science. And I went to a few of the summer camps that were mentioned in the video of similar programs.
And what do you do now, Victoria?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So I'm actually a tax and benefits lawyer in Washington, D.C. I work for a boutique firm. I think it's really exciting. Most people don't. But yeah, I definitely think like gifted education really shaped and like fostered like a curiosity that got me to being a tax lawyer. So it's something in particular that I am really appreciative of in terms of like how gifted education is structured in terms of like pushing you to pursue curiosity. Yeah, is that good, Tracy?
Oh, that's perfect. Wake, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, my name's Wake Norris. I grew up actually in Madisonville, and we made a family choice to move back to Louisville in 2018 to be back in the state and to kind of give back to what gave to us and to kind of get reconnected with family locally as well. I started in gifted education, I guess, in 3rd grade, but I think it was really my parents and my aunt and uncle actually that helped identify me. I remember in 1st grade, they put me through a battery of tests. Today I am a mergers and acquisitions and strategy person here in town, and also spend time in the software startup community and have an engineer and an MBA, engineer and MBA degrees.
Thank you, Wake. Kendra.
Hi, I'm Kendra Otis. I'm so happy to be here tonight. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Yes.
I just started at JCPS last month, or well, actually January, since we're in March now, but I'm a 7th grade counselor here in the district, and I'm not from Louisville. I grew up in northeastern Kentucky, up near West Virginia and Ohio. So the only piece of Kentucky that is considered Appalachia is where I'm from. I went to Asbury University, got a bachelor's in journalism, decided, midway I did not want to be a journalist. So after college, I went to grad school for social work at U of L. And then I went to grad school again to be a school counselor at Spalding. So
terrific. Thank you, Kendra. Cameron.
Hi guys, my name is Cameron Green. I'm from Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's where I grew up. And I actually went through the GEMS Academy and 212 Academy program that Mario mentioned in the video. I've done a lot of the programs through the Gifted Study Center, like VAMPI and SCATS and all those things. And I helped with Camp Innovate and Camp Explore. So now I'm a freshman at the University of Louisville studying bioengineering with a minor in Spanish and a pre-med track.
Great, Cameron. Thank you. Leah.
Hello, such an honor to be here with this panel. My name is Leah Hughes. I'm from here in Louisville, Fairdale, Kentucky, South End, born and raised. Proud working class, proud first-gen student. I attended JCPS public schools, K through 12. I went to Coral Ridge elementary, which is how I got into the gifted education. My parents really got me involved at that level. And then I went to no middle school and Manual High School. And then I left Kentucky for a while to attend a private undergraduate university and did some fellowships. But now I'm back here in the South End going to the Kent School of Social Work for my MSSW. So here we are.
That is terrific. And Leah, would you care to mention your art background? Because I think it's important that we get across the varied interests.
Sure. Yeah. So I, throughout my life, was obviously interested in academics, but, my parents also really encouraged my creative side, and I was raised with a lot of extracurricular programming in the visual arts, and I was a part of the visual arts magnet at Manual High School. And then when I got my undergrad, I majored in politics and studio art, double major. So art is always a part of my life. Taking a backseat right now, but it's always there.
That's okay. That's okay. So you can see we've got a varied panel, lots of different experiences, and they had two things in common. One is that they were all gifted kids, and now they're gifted adults. And two, they've got connections to Louisville. So both Wake and Leah, you mentioned around third grade that you started to get into the gifted, and Wake, you mentioned even earlier than that. When did you first realize that you learned differently from other people? And I won't call on anyone. If you'd like to, you can just give me a signal or start talking.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was probably the first signal was the fact that they were having me tested. So I knew something was different because of that. I don't think I recognized it that early. I think the first time that I kind of became aware, I think is about the time that most kids start to realize they're different from each other. The third to kind of fifth grade range is when I did it. And it was probably largely enabled by my parents. I have a couple of really strong childhood memories where I did something that for me seemed really intuitive, and my parents were like visually taken aback by what I had done. And that just struck me and seared memories, because to me, it was just something that you did. And to them, it was like this moment that was clarifying, I guess, in terms of potential. Now having 3 children of my own, I can definitely identify with those moments.
Definitely. Terrific. Thanks, Wake.
I would agree with Wake. I think for me, I don't know that I ever perceived that I was any different than any other people. It kind of felt like it was like something that I was getting externally from my parents, who were always my biggest fans. So whereas I think maybe the first clue was I got some feedback from my elementary school teachers that I was a little bit impatient with other kids, which is a character flaw. I don't have a lot of patience with other people. I do now, but as a young third grade child, not so much. So I think, as my parents were kind of trying to weave together an understanding of what my skill set was, they also had me tested, and that was kind of when we started to put the pieces together. I don't know that I ever felt that different though, personally, but that's just my experience.
Right. And everybody's different. That's true. But there is a time, I think, kind of when you realize you don't learn the way everybody else does. And I love the idea you brought up your impatience, because, that's a strong trait for many gifted children, especially if you're ready to move on and nobody else is. It can be pretty frustrating. Anybody else want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'll go. I really appreciate your point about, sort of you were exhibiting, I would probably say, more adult traits, right? Or impatience with your peers. 8-year-olds are not impatient usually with each other, right? But I agree. I think for me, I grew up in a rural community in South Central Kentucky, and with really no infrastructure or programs that were available, particularly after school, outside of school programs. And I know for me, when I was younger, I just grew up with my mom. I have a young mom, Jimmy, who's 19. And I think for her, realizing that I was gifted also went hand in hand. It was almost, it was very anxiety inducing in her, because she wasn't sure what to do with me, and that was something she was getting from my teachers as well. And I finally had an elementary school teacher call my mom in. My mom thought I was in trouble, so I was always in trouble, just way too quick with a comeback, always one in the chamber, right? Even as a little kid. And My teacher, told my mom that I don't know what I'm going to do with Victoria. She's too smart for what like I can give her, right? And it's something again like I definitely think I went to public school, a lot less resources than something like Jefferson County, just based on like county income. It's one of the poorest counties in the state, and I grew up very poor as well. And it was something I think a lot of times gifted education or gifted children, at least for me, can feel. It felt like I was a problem, right? Like it was something like the way I was learning or what I was interested in. I was getting trouble with my homework because I would answer it, but I wasn't super interested in what was going on, right? I was much more interested in the ideas that come from it. Coincidentally, that's something that followed me to law school, and my professors had a lot to say about it. I was like, oh, why are we asking this question? We should be talking about this. And they'd be like, that's not the law. But anyway, all that to wrap it up to say, yeah, I think like there can be a lot of frustration when like from the child's perspective in terms of like if you are gifted because you feel like you're not communicating necessarily or like or even about the same thing. And so that was something I know my mom and I have now talked about, like, as I'm an adult and like in like candidly in therapy. And like, it was very much something she was overwhelmed by me as a kid, as far as me being a young mom, a single parent. But I think I think a big hallmark of me understanding that I was gifted or learned differently or whatever was sort of understanding that, oh, wow, I was in an environment where no one knew what to do with that. So it felt wrong.
Felt wrong. That's an interesting word choice. And in Kentucky, gifted and talented children are under the umbrella of exceptional education. So just as if you give birth to a deaf child or you have adopted a deaf child, that child will learn very differently from a hearing child, from the average learner. Someone with a learning disability will learn very differently from the average learner. Somebody with a high IQ or a talent in some area will learn very differently. And, parenting is tough enough. And Wake and Mary, I know you can agree with that. It's challenging, but when you have a child who has special needs, it can be overwhelming. And I do want, parents to realize that these are special needs. So when your child needs services, when Victoria needs to move ahead and Leah's not going to be impatient if she's with the right group of kids, that's okay. Those accommodations and modifications should be made because your child has special needs. And I know we don't really consider it, but for gifted kids, their needs come from their strengths and not their deficiencies. And that's a big difference. Anybody else want to answer that question?
I can go.
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead, Cameron.
We'll start with Cameron first, and then go to Kendra, if that's okay.
Okay. Personally, it was around third grade as well. The thing is, I remember being hungry. Like for me, it presented in reading. Like I did a lot of reading. There was always books. I needed more. I wanted to be stimulated. And it wasn't that the teacher wasn't trying. Like I love my third grade teacher. She's my favorite. But the books is where I got like the most attention I got, I guess. But getting tested, because I went to GEMS that at the time it was called GEMS, and they would leave a couple days a week. It was very present. Like it was literally a divide between the students who were identified as gifted in some ways and the students who weren't. So like for a while I wasn't part of that. So like I was left behind and I wasn't identified at the time as gifted. So I was just kind of sitting there trying to do something, and it was fine, but I felt like it wasn't enough. And then when I did get tested and they were like, well, yeah, you should actually start going to GEMS, or then it became 212. It was a big shift because like now I'm finally with a bunch of other kids who are like me. So it was different.
That's an important thing, kids who are like you. And in fact, gifted kids have two sets of peers. They have idea mates and age mates. And age mates just happen to be born the same year you were born in, and you're sitting with them in classes, right? But idea mates can be 10, 20 years older than you are, right? So it's important to be with both groups. Project GEMS came from a grant, and it's gifted education in math and science. That's where they got GEMS. And it, for students, they would go to a magnet school for 1 day a week. And that's how it started out. So just to clarify that. Kendra.
Yeah, so for me, I figured out that I was different as soon as I started school. I went into school already knowing how to read. My mom taught me how to read because she got tired of me asking what the newspaper said as she's reading it. So, before I even went to school, I already knew how to read. And then I get to kindergarten and like we're coloring, and I'm like, you guys don't already like, come on, let's do something else. But where I went to elementary school, I was in a split kindergarten and first grade class. So we would all start out the morning together and then the first graders would leave. Well, I had a super old kindergarten teacher who did not really keep good track of us. So I would bounce whenever the first graders left. And, I can't even tell you how long I was doing this. I don't remember being in kindergarten for very long. My mom came to the school to pick me up early one day and they had no clue where I was. And the first grade teacher didn't realize I wasn't supposed to be there. My kindergarten teacher didn't know I was gone. And that was the last memory I have of kindergarten. My mom must have raised all kinds of sand up there, and I got skipped to first grade, and it was even then like I could tell that there was just something different about how I thought. I was always in trouble for going ahead or doing my own thing with the instructions, and it's interesting because even now, like I'm 34, but even now I still see ways that I learn differently from people. I'm like, oh, it's not, you guys don't sit and like read a book and like watch TV and also be on your computer and, all of these things, like, you don't like, everyone doesn't work like that. Also, even now I'm in a book study with the gifted program at JCPS, and we're reading a book called Thinking Like a Lawyer, which has just been phenomenal. But with the book study, yes, with this book study, I find myself in my like old habits of not doing the reading beforehand. I'll show up to the discussion, listen to the discussion, and then if it interests me, then I go back and I do the reading afterwards. And in college, I never bought books for my classes. I've got 3 degrees and bought very few books. I don't have the library that everyone else has because I'm not going to buy a book that I'm never going to use. And I would go to class and engage in the discussions and be fine. So, I'm constantly surprised by, the things I find out about myself, even now. Like I'm a lifelong learner, but it's just really interesting. The older I get, the more that I'm aware of how my brain works a little differently.
And it's exciting when you're an adult, right? You own it, you are who you are, but it can be troublesome sometimes when you're a child. And Kendra, kudos for self-advocating. I mean, you didn't even have to advocate. You just did what you wanted to do, which I find charming and adorable. And I hope you didn't get in too much trouble for that because that was awesome. That's what you should be doing. So that's an example of this works for me, kindergarten doesn't. And so once you were accelerated there, perhaps you had more appropriate learning experiences. So why don't you all share what were some of the learning experiences you had that really were effective for you? So it might be maybe the way one teacher taught, it could be a service that you got, just something that happened in school that really worked for you. And hopefully parents, you can get some ideas of things that work. I'll take a volunteer to start.
I will.
Kendra, and then we'll do Leah.
Okay. So for me, school has never been engaging. It's the only thing I can think of in the classroom setting that was engaging was we didn't have any gifted programming in elementary school. I don't even remember being tested, but at some point we got tested, I guess, and middle school was when gifted programming started. But you only had it for 3 years because there was nothing at the high school level. And our gifted programming was the gifted class, which is why I don't have any I've had to learn life skills on my own because I missed out on that class. It coincided with gifted. So, but that class, we were able to do independent studies. We did, college research papers. It was very independent learning about topics that I was interested in. And then we would present the information to the class. So it could be whatever topic you wanted to learn about. I remember bringing my PlayStation in one day and teaching people how to play Madden football game on PlayStation. And, but it was that freedom of exploring topics that I was interested in and then getting to share what I had learned with others was really the most engaging classroom experience that I had. I have found that what works for me is finding experiences outside of the classroom to engage me. So in high school, the most memorable thing I remember doing is Upward Bound, but I did their math and science program. Now, I hate math and science, but the program sounded interesting because they had a forensics class. And, I spent the summer at a college campus and, I took forensics and got to, see a cadaver and solve, it was like doing CSI stuff before CSI was a thing. But finding those experiences in college, I took a semester and instead of doing classes on campus, I interned for a state legislator and learned what state government looks like. Senior year of college, I could graduate early or I could do, a different experience. So I did an urban immersion in Los Angeles, lived with a Mexican host family, took classes in Koreatown, interned in, a community center between two gang territories. So for me, it's always been a matter of having to figure out what works and where I can insert myself to get what I need. And so that advocacy piece that you talk about, it doesn't have to be going into a room and demanding your rights. It can be, all right, I'm going to advocate for myself by finding what does work and experiences where I can be challenged and learn.
So you've tailored your education as much as you possibly could, and it's interesting because when you look at research, and a couple of studies have interviewed adults looking back at what were your most memorable times, and for most of them, it's when they were with other kids like themselves. So, Kendra, you talked about what fun it was to be able to share what you're interested in, but it was also, I'm sure, pretty cool to have kids who are interested in learning about things. That's that give and take. Leah.
Kendra and I have not met until today, but I just want to say I really feel so validated by everything that she's saying. And I really want to drive home for parents that I think a lot of times when you have a gifted child, what that often means is that for whatever reason, like your child's brain works in such a way that is really conducive to the way that, our society thinks of learning. And you can kind of reinforce that in two ways, I think. There's like kind of one way that's a little more punitive about the, crossing your T's and dotting your I's, getting good grades, getting the good test scores, like what's your percentage, what's the percentile. And I think it's really easy for gifted kids and parents of gifted kids to get caught up in those metrics as like the concrete ways that your child is successful at learning. But I think what's far more important for the emotional health of the gifted child, speaking as somebody who's lived through that experience, is really finding opportunities for your child to embrace the love of learning as a part of their personality. And I think that happens through social connections with kids that you can relate to. I think that happens through extracurricular learning experiences. And that doesn't have to be like a camp for math, right? Like I did the Center for Gifted Studies programming across many different like stages of my life and a lot of different kinds of classes and a lot of diversity of subjects. And I think that really helps strengthen, your child's identity as like a learner and not as like a successful person, because success will always evade, even a gifted child, because it's kind of this unreachable point, right? But I think to kind of foster like a lifelong relationship with their brain and with the way that they learn, those diverse learning experiences and meeting other kids that are interested in the same things in an extracurricular way is like super crucial. I'm still friends with so many of my friends, that I met through those kinds of experiences, and it really helps to have a community. So yeah, strongly agree with Kendra.
Yeah, if I can build on what you said, Leah, as well. I mean, I think for me, the thing that kind of pairs with that is the process of my parents going and seeking those opportunities for me and being my advocate and partner, and even just their acknowledgement of the attempt, even sometimes when it wasn't possible, was such an emotional support that in a lot of ways, even though, growing up in a small town, I had more limited opportunities, just the confidence it gave me to stand on my own 2 feet and to not be afraid of reaching out and being a little different, because my parents were supportive of that. And because having met other gifted kids in programs like the center offers, really set me on a course that allowed me to once it became much more in my control to truly be my own advocate when I went to college and beyond, and to take personal charge of my own learning in the environment that I knew I needed to be successful. But a lot of it was just knowing that my parents had my back, or that when they didn't know how, that they would introduce me to resources or other adults or such that could do those things. They couldn't always be there. They owned a small business. They worked a lot, but they supported me nonetheless in little ways many times. And that really, I think, kind of built on what Leah was saying. Like, you get the opportunities and everything, and they don't always work, and you're always frustrated a little bit, I think, as a parent, now seeing that from the other side. But the confidence that you give your child from that attempt alone, I think, really helps.
I so agree with that. And research also shows that having a champion, a mentor, someone who's going to help guide you or be there to encourage you. Victoria, you said you had a young mom who was kind of overwhelmed. Well, she certainly found programming for you, right? She found outlets and those kind of things.
Yeah, I was going to speak on that point a little bit. I think my introduction to gifted education and sort of the support I was getting was a little bit different. Kind of like Wake said, I was from like a small town in a tiny county. And so for me, I definitely had to advocate within my own family. Like I said, my mom, like the financial strain was a huge part. Vandy is not cheap in particular. And like even the possibility of going somewhere, like the nearest place, I'm trying to think. I grew up in a place called Litchfield, Kentucky. It's like about 70 miles from Louisville, I believe. But yeah, like the idea of being able to go to like after school programs where I could meet like-minded peers was just not really on the table. And so like my experience in school was very frustrating. Like I loved school in the sense I loved learning, but I did not enjoy, K through 12. Kind of like Kendra was saying, like I really loved college. I didn't find it rigorous, right? And so my first real academic challenge was law school, and it was really, really hard. And so it was something I very much had and still have the perspective of formal education as being like hoops you have to jump through. And I heard a little bit of that with what Leah was saying in terms I wasn't interested in math or science, but I wanted more knowledge, right? So I signed up for these programs, and that was very much my experience. And so I took what I wanted from them, and then I kind of left the others, right? And I think that was the best case I could do, particularly with some resistance from my family. Not resistance, but just there were some realities, right? And so there was a lot of intimidation and being able to get the support I needed. I know my mom in particular felt ill-equipped to give it to me from a few different perspectives, right? And as someone who's very different from the rest of my family in general, career-wise and where I live now, yeah, it's something that I think you have to figure out a way to exist within the system, right? Because I think that's something a common frustration that anyone with different learning disabilities have, or not disabilities, I apologize, different learning needs. And so for gifted students, it can feel sometimes I think performative to just kind of go through and say, okay, just because I do better, for instance, I was always much better at math and science than my classmates in my regular high school, right? But that does not mean I'm good at math and science. I'm not. I had one econ class and I almost failed it in college, and now I'm a tax lawyer. But all that to say, I think being able to expand the universe outside of this structured education, right? I say this as someone who wants to get another degree outside of a JD. Even though I think the structure can be very limiting, I think it's really important. But you still have to do it, right? You do sort of need that discipline. I think something that gifted students kind of fall into is things are really easy for them, right? Particularly in my situation where there's no gifted classes. So I was doing regular courses. And so, it's, I think it's important to understand that you have to exist within the structure, but also there's so much more outside of it, right? You can pursue there are things to pursue that you haven't even heard of. I took Tracy's class at Vandy, actually humanities, and I still read some of the things that we read in the class. Like, I just reread the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's just, and she exposed me to literature that I never would have gotten. And it's something, it is like, I am a lifelong literature fan now. And some of the things, my favorite works are things that I got from her class, right? And I would have never gotten that ever. I probably wouldn't even have gotten that in college, and so with my discipline. And so, yeah, I think a big point for me with this was gifted education and like being the student, the parent, whatever place you take in it. It's very frustrating, right? Because it's always a fight. Because that's what it's like when you know too much, right? You always want more information. So you're always going to have to get to another level. And I think that's something you have to be prepared for and, ready. Like, what is it like when you're not successful? Like, I went to the Gatton Academy for a year, and like I said, above average at math and science, but not actually a math and science person. So I really struggled there. And I only spent 1 year there. And so I think also you have to allow for failure, and sort of, it's not just a direct descent. And so that's, I apologize to aren't more cohesive. I was thinking on some of these questions earlier, and yeah, but in terms of like gifted education, I think that's so important to make sure you set up a system where, no, it's not just a binary, but it's also like, you're going to fail sometimes. That doesn't mean you're not gifted, right? You just need to go and pursue something else. And I don't know, I think a lot to learn from it. And I've really enjoyed hearing everyone else's responses. Now I'm reflecting on my own education experience.
It is fun to talk about, I think. And you made several good points there. You all are making great points. But perfectionism is a huge deal with advanced learning. It just is, especially if you're in a smaller area, the big fish in a little pond story, right? So you can sit there, Kendra, and not purchase a book and still listen, and you're going to get good grades. But oftentimes you're going to come to a brick wall. And for Victoria, you said it was law school. Well, hopefully, that it was really, really hard. Gatton was hard and things you didn't want to study. So that we have to model as parents. It is so important for us to model our screw ups, our mistakes, our changes of mind, right? I can remember being on full scholarship in a university. I got into it about 2 months and I'm like, I do not want to spend my life doing this in grad school. And I switched, and it was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And everybody was shocked because I always knew what I was going to do. It was that kind of path. So you have to celebrate when kids that sounds kind of silly, but celebrate when they mess up and then figure out how to do it. It's that problem solving, letting them know that this is how we all grow. So important. Cameron, would you like to share some things that worked for you in the classroom or out?
Yeah, so my parents are definitely my biggest cheerleaders even now. Like it's a continual thing, and the biggest thing is that they had to keep up with me. They had to be as hungry and as wanting as I was, and as fast as I went through resources, they had to keep trying to look for it. And if I didn't really, like Victoria said, if I wasn't really into a subject, they still had to find some other kind of program that did work for whatever I wanted to do. And I'm sure that was hard for them, but they did a great job. And I did do programs like Vampy and SCATs. And then in high school, I did kind of have like this person that was there for me, especially when I was in my junior and senior year. This teacher she pushed me hard. Like, that was a lot of fun, honestly. It was. And she was like, this is good, and I know you've got it, but I want to see you write even harder and write even more. And then sometimes out of nowhere, she'd be like, I've signed you up for this. You're going to do this because I know you can, and I know you're going to do great, but I think you need to do more. And then she also encouraged me to do GSP, which was good, again, because it was taking courses without grades, which is so important because, back to the perfectionist point, I will do something over and over until I get it the way I want it, or keep pushing until it's perfect. And with GSP, it's not about that. It's just about learning the material, presenting it to peers who understand you. And that's really important. And I feel like if schools were more like this, especially for gifted students, there would be more growth and progress. And that's really important.
Sure is. It GSP is the Governor Scholars Program, and it's available for folks after they finish their junior year of high school. It's a competitive program, and it's a 5-week residential program. I know we're so used to this language. I just want to make sure our parents understand. Now, I want to point out that I started the question with what works for you in school. And we got not much, apparently, because you all kind of started relating to your out of school experiences, right? Jefferson County Public Schools is at a very exciting place as they are revamping. They're making sure that they're looking for equitable identification so that we're going to have kids who really represent Louisville, not just white upper middle class, right? We're going to have kids who represent Louisville, and we're going to have innovative services, things that haven't been available before. And their teachers, right now, we've got the second cohort of teachers learning, getting their gifted endorsement, which is 12 graduate hours. And Jefferson County is paying for that. Each school is having its own GT committee. And so parents, if you haven't heard about a GT committee at your school, you need to be asking questions. So we're really moving in the right direction, and we're getting ready to train principals. I mean, it's very, very exciting stuff. But I want you to kind of think back. Cameron talked about a favorite teacher who pushed you, who didn't accept good enough, right? She wanted to push you farther. And you've also mentioned going to the magnet school one day a week, right? And for others of you, can you find, was there one teacher or one thing that somebody did that, wow, this is super?
I actually have an opposite.
Go for it.
I had a lot of great teachers that were relatively supportive within the context through my career. But the thing that like really motivated me once or twice is I got to high school and there was a group of us that advocated for an AP calculus class, and the math department chair told us we couldn't handle it. And so half of us went and took it at the community college in a semester instead. So like that kind of thing has kicked my butt a couple of times when I was a kid. Just be like, what do you mean I can't do it? Right? Then I will go figure out a way. So for me, some of the most memorable moments in advocacy came not from when I was actively advocated against, actually, because then it became a challenge to overcome in a way. Now, I wouldn't encourage anyone to do it that way.
That's tough. Yeah.
But it was something that then kind of motivated me. And then my parents then supported it. I came home and I told this story and they're like, sure, you want to go to the community college? You go.
That's awesome. I sure hope some of you passed the exam. That's a tough way to do it. But you've also said your parents started with you at a very young age with trying to find things for you to do. You've had that support all along.
Yeah.
So parents out there, you don't have to have all the answers, right? You just have to ask questions.
Yeah, that's definitely what my parents did. It was just a lot of questions.
Anybody else have a story you'd like to share about a school experience that motivated you or where you really learned?
I had kind of a similar thing where I had already taken all of the Spanish classes they had to offer at my school, and I was like, I'm ready for more. Language is great for gifted students a lot of times, I think, because there's just so much and you can go so far with it. And there's more than just the language, there's the culture too. So I was trying to go further and they were like, but this is not important. You're one student. We're not going to give you the services to take this AP Spanish class. And you're already enrolled in Spanish 4. And I was like, but I can take this class. I know they have it at the other high school. I'd like to take it. And they were like, they didn't offer me options on what I could do. So I actually reached out to the teacher myself at the other school, and I went ahead and scheduled a free block and did an independent study for the Spanish exam and went ahead and did it myself because they weren't going to advocate for me the way I needed them to. So I did it.
That's awesome. And let me build on what she said and mine too. Like, I don't want to criticize the school in that they let me leave campus and go to a community college and take that class and get credit for it. So like, although I got a no, I definitely got a hard yes if I was willing to do the work. And it sounds like, Carmen, you had kind of a similar experience there where they wouldn't give you the class, but they let you have the experience.
Which is exciting. It really is, Cameron. And Kendra can relate just from her kindergarten story. We know that she does a similar thing with that.
I also want to chime in as I think, a JCPS student through and through. I think when I was in preschool, my instructors there directed my parents toward a elementary school in the South End in Fairdale that had a gifted and accelerated program. And, you know, I don't think, again, like so many others on this panel, I don't think my parents really knew what to do with me. They like were very not like the best students themselves. I think they were kind of like feeling around in the dark, trying to figure it out. And having just even one or two teachers at your school that can really advocate and help your child feel like they belong, especially if you come from any kind of marginalized background. In my case, it was like my class background, but I know for so many others, you know, it could be, you know, your racial or ethnic background, your gender identity, your sexual identity, whatever that may be. Sometimes it can be hard to feel like you belong in a gifted space because for so long, like we're kind of conditioned to think that it looks like one thing. But I really am so grateful that like at that young age, those, you know, 2 or 3, 4, 5, you know, that team at Coral Ridge Elementary School in Fairdale, Kentucky, really reassured me and my family, like, no, you do belong. Yes, you should apply for this magnet school. Like, yes, you should take this placement exam. Like, get on the quick recall team. Because, you know, even as a little kid, like, you don't want to be weird and you don't really want to stand out if that's not like what your peers are doing. And when you get there, it can feel really alienating and kind of bad, but just having, you know, 1 or 2 teachers that are really on your side can make a huge difference. And it really did for me in terms of feeling like you belong. And then you have the confidence to flourish.
But I sure hope you've let them know that, because that's an important thing.
To piggyback off of that, for me, it didn't happen until my senior year. I'd had, you know, teachers who built relationships with me, but as far as like one who really pushed me, it didn't happen until 12th grade. And that was when I had my first teacher that looked like me, a Black female. Before that, everyone had been white. And, you know, it was a game changer to have someone who, you know, could get with me, like about my bad student behavior. You know, you're not just going to coast through my class. You're not going to not read these books. You're going to finish your senior writing portfolio. You know, just someone who could handle that mouth. Someone mentioned the comebacks and, you know, teachers not always being with that. So for me, it was, you know, Miss Heydrich, my senior English teacher. I gave her a heart attack about the senior portfolio because I literally finished it like at the very last moment that she could accept it after school one day. But, you know, just having someone who understood and was like, all right, I get that you're different, but that's not gonna fly for this class. You're going to apply yourself. You're going to push yourself. So that was the game changer.
And that's huge. And Kendra, you know, you said she's the first person who looked like you. Throughout the United States and beyond, we have a huge problem with underrepresentation of certain populations. And that includes Black and brown kids in particular, kids from low socioeconomic status, children who have more than one exceptionality, perhaps a learning disability along with being gifted, kids who are learning English as an additional language, LGBTQ plus kids. So we're trying really hard as a nation to work on equity of access, equity of identification services. You were probably, well, how many other Black kids were in the Gifted and Talented program with you, Kendra?
That would be 0. Yeah, there only one in the program. And I know that, you know, I wasn't I cannot accept that I was the only one in the whole school who should have been identified. You know, that I've graduated with people who have gone on to become doctors, dentists, you know, lawyers. So I know that, you know, I just can't have been the only one. But I will say, growing up where I grew up, I was used to being the only one in most rooms that I occupied. And gifted, like the gifted class seemed to be like one of the only even playing fields because we were like, that program was under-resourced for all of us. It didn't matter like who in the room had money and who didn't, or who in the room was white and who, you know, was Black or any other color. We were all underserved because growing up in Appalachia, there aren't resources for like regular education, let alone exceptional learners. So, we were kind of all disadvantaged when it comes to that. And, that I hate that that's the level, like the first level playing field that I really felt like I had in education, but it was. Now, when you move forward a little bit, like the people in that gifted program, some of them who were more upper class, of course they had access to more opportunities. Of course they could, uh, go to a summer program and, do whatever. But, for the most part, we were all kind of just thrown in there together, not really knowing what, how to challenge ourselves or, all of that. So for me, that was the interesting piece of it. But still, like going beyond it, there certainly are areas where those disadvantages, you can't level the playing field in some cases.
No, you can't. You can't. And that's one reason when I talk about equitable identification. In Kentucky, our regulations say you have to have at least 3 pieces of evidence. And that doesn't mean that all 3 pieces have to be, wow, stellar. It's in case one piece isn't. You've got other pieces to help support that. And we're looking at universal screening, which means I'm not just going to pick out these 3 that I think may be gifted, but every single person in the school is going to have this assessment. And we might look at local norms. For example, Kendra, you said there were very few Black kids in your area. You used to be the only one. So you need to do local norms with those kids and not, or English language learners or whatever that subpopulation happens to be, because there are gifted and talented children across all demographics. 100% believe that. Especially when they're younger, you've got the folks who've had all kinds of experiences, if the parents have money and resources, versus those who don't have those experiences. So it takes a little time for them to catch up. They might not be reading when they go to school, but when they start, it's on chapter books. So there's a big difference with that. Would anyone else like to speak to being alone with that or feeling, well, let me ask you this, and Kendra, I'm going to ask you again because we've talked about this. For your friends, were you ever made fun of for being in the gifted program?
Yeah. There was definitely a stigma to it. I think because, for one, we were never even really talked to about what being gifted meant. No one really told us. It was just a label that was thrown upon us, and our schedules were changed. So like I said, we didn't take the life skills class that everyone else took. So, I didn't learn how to cook. I didn't get to take the, baby home to learn how to, care for a child. There's a learning curve for sure. But, we, outside of that class, it was like we were the geeks, and plus most of us in that class traveled together all day long in advanced classes. So yeah, you definitely feel set apart. Already being poor, being Black, and then you throw in, they've given me this title, I don't even know what it means. Just that, I'm smart. And I will say, I had a conversation with a student last semester who, she didn't know what being gifted meant either. So I'm like, and here we are in 2020, it was 2020 at the time. We still are having labels put on students and they don't know what that means. So, I asked her, what do you think being gifted means? And she was like, oh, I make good grades. I'm smart. I'm like, well, I can tell you, I was gifted and I didn't make good grades, at certain points. So that's not all that label means. So for me, it's important to, talk to kids who have that label and make sure that they know what it means. Not just that you're smart, not just that you make good grades, but that your brain is wired differently and you learn differently, and different does not mean bad.
No. I saw lots of heads nodding when you said, didn't even know what gifted was. You want to share the experience when you came to understand what gifted and talented was? Anybody?
I mean, for me, it was never crystallized. This is someone who was in an education system that didn't really have, I think there was maybe cursory support for it, my elementary school program, but there wasn't in my middle school, and my high school didn't have any sort of program for it. So everything I was getting was externally through extracurricular things like VAMPI, the Center for Gifted Studies. And I was very aware of like how my like socioeconomic status, race, geographic location had a big impact on me falling behind from the people I would meet at Bambi, right? And that's definitely something I like. I feel and hope the gap is narrowing, like as like I've ascended through my education, and now that for instance, I remember going to law school and I was like, I don't feel prepared, comparatively. I also went straight through from college, which was a foolish move. It's, yeah. And so I think in terms of like what gifted really means, I never figured that out in any sort of, like definitional way. I took it kind of like Kendra was saying, like, yeah, like, being a nerd outside of class, right? No one, I never got any flack for being gifted because I mean, infinitely more things to make fun of. So that was, on the much lower list. I'm teasing. But anyway, I think it's something, as nebulous as it is, and like because it is so specific, right? With people with different exceptionalities, I think is the word we used. I think for me, it was really important to like understand like the perspective of like what I was interested in and my environment, right? Like what was possible, like what I should be reaching out to try and do. I know that was something that was very much an echo chamber, even all the way up to like my professional career, was a lot of timidness from like my support from my mom and my family. And like my mom was an incredible woman, so supportive. But there is, that uncertainty of like, what if you can't do it? Like what happens then, right? Or like, is there, this sense of like, are you reaching too high? Like, and I think that's a very real thing, particularly if you are coming from like a gifted narrative in a place like Kentucky. It's like I would have killed to go to JCPS schools, to get my K through 12 education and have those resources, right? Even just as someone else from Kentucky, and I think Kendra's probably echoing that as well, so I think it's really important to have a perspective on where you're coming from and to say like, yeah, you may not be able to do this, but that doesn't mean you can't do that. Like, I know I was really crushed that I didn't go to like a quote unquote prestigious college. I got a full ride to U of L. I was not going to college without, a scholarship. No way. And so I took it and I was really bummed out at the time. And when I went to law school, I realized, oh, okay, I couldn't go to Harvard as an undergrad, but I can go to a top law school as a law student. And I think that's something kind of going to what Cameron was saying about the perfectionism of like, when you do something, you get it right. I think perspective was the biggest thing I had to learn in terms of like, just because like each, step of your success is not like monumental doesn't mean you won't have monumental success, right? And so I think that was something that gave me a lot of peace, like later on in my education, and something that like, I think when I have my own children who I know will be gifted, even if it's just to play in the kazoo, and like keeping in mind for them that, it is about perspective, right? You can't be all gifted all the time, or like, yeah, it stinks that you don't have this opportunity and it's unfair, right? But like, you got to keep going. So I think that was a really big part of like my own evaluation of myself as a quote unquote gifted student, always someone who like, was identified as such, mostly because an avid reader. I think that was sort of the shorthand for being gifted in my school. So it's like, oh, you read without being told to? There's something special about you. And so, I think that's so important because it really can feel very claustrophobic, to feel like, you have all of this promise and then none of these outlets. It made me really miserable as a kid, to feel like I could do all of these things, but for whatever limitation I couldn't. And that's something I like look back on now and realize, I was being a bit dramatic, but there also is some truth in it. And so I think in terms of seeing yourself as a gifted student, seeing your children as gifted children, I think it's so important to just really beat in that perspective. I really struggled when I was a senior in high school. I felt like I was not going to be good because I was going to a state university, and I got an incredible education. I loved my undergrad experience,
And can I interrupt for just a moment?
Yeah.
Would you like to share what position you held at your undergrad experience at the University of
Yeah, so I was student body president there, which I really liked. I definitely thrived at a large university. I very much needed more space to stretch. That's something also I definitely think if I had gone to like a small, tiny liberal arts school, I probably not have liked it as much, just like based on like size. I really needed space to expand. Like I went to a university with 5 times the number of people of the town that like where I grew up in, it had about 5,000 people in it. So like it was very different. But yeah, I think that's something that was like the greatest gift, sense of relief. Honestly, the thing that allowed me to, I think, be successful now was understanding perspective on that. And like you can be a gifted student, a gifted learner throughout your entire life. And like it's something, yeah, and it's not necessarily this one linear structure. Like that was something I really like. I felt very bold in law school and saying, no, I refuse to believe there's an XYZ path to success because, again, I was very much, the odd one out. The majority of my colleagues came from like very like high socioeconomic backgrounds, again, went to like very prestigious institutions. They had like 27 lawyers in their family. I had none. And I specifically did not choose criminal law so that my family couldn't call me for advice. But anyway, sorry, just to wrap this up and say, I think you have to remember that you're gifted your entire life. It's not just when you're in high school. It's not just when you're doing these programs, and like you will find outlets for it. Like my fiance and I do a lot of recreational reading now. It's like things that I would have loved to have read in high school and college, like literature, and it's something we put into our home life because like I still want that and didn't get it from a structured education. So
Definitely. And that's important to kind of pulls back to our first question about you learn differently. You're hardwired differently. That's who you are for your life. And I think the more we understand about ourselves, the easier we are on ourselves, the different perspectives we have. So I think for children to understand if they are gifted and talented, they need to understand what that means. And parents, you need to have a conversation with them. Please let them know it does not make them more special than other people. They are different from other kids. And it's not going to be easy all the time with that. So, you kind of have to walk them through that. If you had a blind child, you would talk about his blindness, right? And I don't mean to trivialize that, but I do want to stress that it's not a choice somebody makes to be gifted or not. Speaking of getting to know yourselves, we have a question from the audience. How many of you have done Myers-Briggs testing and know your language there? Everybody's done Myers-Briggs testing. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, I don't know how much of a background I can give you, but it's a series of questions that you ask, and it tells you many things about your personality, like you're introverted or extroverted, thinking or feeling. It's 4 different letters with that. Would anybody like to share? Did that make an impact on you when you found it out? Was it like, oh, this is why I do that? Anybody have the aha experience? Nope. Victoria, maybe Leah, Kendra?
Yeah, I did it actually I think at Vampy, maybe in a Vampy class. It was definitely something with the gifted program. And what I really liked about it is someone like I in general am not for an institutional person in terms of like, like this or that, or, I adhere to all these qualities whenever test, right? It's not super my thing. But I think it's really interesting in terms of just like grouping together like characteristics in terms of like how like they, maybe reflected in your work life. Like my Myers-Briggs formulation is ESTJ, which I think, and like they each have like a label with them. It's like those like the executive, right? And I think it was good in terms of like understanding like how you work. And so like something that I think also like really my mom struggled with when I was growing up is that like I'm very decisive. I think that comes from maybe like, just I think there's probably something like really off-putting about a 7-year-old just like making a grand pronouncement, right, about like how something should happen. And so I think, as a kid, it's kind of weird. And so that's something like there's a big characteristic of mine. And like that was something reading my Myers-Briggs really, I don't know, it gave me like good scenarios to think about how that would come into play, right? It's less so like I think some people feel like it's more like reading your fortune, more so I think it just gives you scenarios to see like strong characteristics you have and say like how they may play out, or like give you a situation and say, how would you react to this? And I think it'd be really insightful. So
yeah, if I take from that, I mean, for me, I've taken so many of I think I've taken all of them, right? At this point in my career, like I've been put through them and over again in every different kind. And like, I remember back getting those. I mean, if I were to give advice to parents, like, it's great to give your child language for what they have and their strengths and weaknesses, but it's equally important to let them know it does not define them, right?
Yes.
You are not a test score. You are not an ENFP or an ISTJ or these other letters from the personality tests. So, and it's really easy, I think, as gifted children in particular, to gravitate towards the score or the result, right? We want to, we're told we're smarter and we kind of feel different. And then there's a number that says how different or something like that, right? And as I grew up, I was in positions to work with other gifted children, and one of the things I always tried to remind them is that, like, we are gifted in different ways, and these things are helpful tools that give us a framework to discuss things and an understanding of ourselves. But that is it. They are our understanding of ourselves. They aren't for anybody else necessarily, although they're often projected externally. It's really about kind of, I think, knowing thyself and knowing what you want to do with them. And as parents, I think helping our children not get wrapped up in that is really important at the younger age in particular.
Yes.
I would watch gifted kids compare their scores and like watch one that made like a 32 on the ACT walk away dejected as like a loser. And you have to pull them aside. They're like, you're doing okay. And to encourage people that it's not that. These are things to learn about yourself and to learn about your child. And that's really all.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Wake, because people get really hung up on IQ scores, and all the other testing. And I think it is a great thing to gather information about your child. The more information you have, the better you can advocate and the better the child can advocate. But it doesn't mean that that information defines who you are. And it may not even be accurate. It could be skewed in different ways. I know when my son had his IQ test taken, the psychologist said his score is probably 5 to 10 points higher than it is because he didn't cooperate with me at all. Right. So it could have easily been the other way. All right. So please, parents, listen to what Wake is saying. It's very important to know that it helps you understand yourself better, but nobody needs to be comparing ACT scores and all that stuff.
For me, I recently read something that said, like, people who spend a lot of time like studying personality types and stuff do that because they didn't feel understood as a child. And I find that to be so true for myself because, I've always been interested in personality types and like zodiac signs and all of that. And I really do feel that that knowing that about myself has been so helpful. Like when I first took the Myers-Briggs as a 17-year-old college freshman, I was an ENTP. Totally, like, that was wrong. I'm not extroverted at all. I can't even believe I'm doing this today. But I'm truly an INFJ, and that is the advocate. And then I also really love the Enneagram personality test. I'm a 2-wing 3 on that. And knowing those things about myself has just been such a game changer. Really, because I didn't feel understood. My mom was like, I don't know what this kid is. Like, she's super smart, but she's also defiant. Like, she's, doing all of these things that she should not be doing, but like, she makes good grades. So I don't know how to do I punish her? Do I not? Like, she just didn't really get me. And no, I felt like nobody got me in really none of the circles, anywhere. So for me, that personality piece has been really helpful. Just to really know how my brain works and how my heart works and all of that. So for me, it's been really helpful to explore that kind of thing as a gift. I always feel like, am I still gifted? I feel a little less gifted than I did like 20 years ago. But yeah, it's just been really helpful for me.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I do think, self-discovery is exciting. It's not always positive, which you find out about yourself, but it's part of that growth process, right? It's very, very important. We have about 15 minutes left. And I had asked each of you, one of the questions was, what advice could you give families, parents of gifted children?
I have something.
Oh, thanks. Kate.
I would say help your child to be self-aware and to self-assess, because whatever the teacher doesn't see, it's just going to go missed. And sometimes parents don't see what's in their kids. So sometimes teaching them to articulate what they're feeling or what they're seeing, or just ask them, how do you see, like, how was your day? Like, think about how they're talking to you and how they're describing their day, and tell them to think about, why am I impatient with everyone else? Why? And that should help kind of at least have them tell you, so you can help them do what they want. And this, another thing would be back to the identity, like personality kind of thing. At my elementary school, which, going back to Dr. Evans, I'm very thankful for what she did. They kind of separated out some of the categories of being gifted and talented, like gifted and talented art and things like that, kind of made it clear to me that there's more than one kind of gifted. And that, like, honestly, as I got older, my definition of gifted became less clear than when it was in elementary school, when I could see that this person is gifted in reading or whatever. So as a parent, you need to help your kid explore what they are gifted in, to make sure that they feel confident and that they have like confidence in their personality. Because when I took my personality test, I was like, yep, that makes sense, because I know who I am, and that's because I had a strong foundation in elementary school, honestly.
So I hear a lot of communication, honest communication, not getting by with fine when you say, how was school? Questioning things, letting them discover themselves, helping them do that. Terrific advice.
I want to throw something in there and say,
Sure.
Please, please, please help your children develop a true passion and love for joy and self-care, because I think burnout is a real problem, not only for kids and gifted adults, but also for parents, right? You're always trying to, I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine that there's so much pressure on you as a parent under normal circumstances. And then to feel the additional layer of pressure to be kind of like doing the right thing for your child that has this like special gift, and you just have to make sure you're not making any mistakes. But in my experience, like some of the most transformative and valuable experiences I had in my adolescence, of course, were some of the academic experiences, but were also opportunities that my parents gave me to really have kind of like unsupervised fun, where I got to like really get to know who I was, echoing the sentiments of Cameron and Kendra, just really how crucial it is to like emphasize that like all people are equal, right? Like just because you have a tool isn't the best tool. It's so important to make friends. It's so important to learn how to love yourself, learn how to take a day off. I'm sure probably everyone here has struggled with that. I struggle with that now as a 28-year-old woman. So just really building that in a young age, even though you feel the pressure to do a whole lot all the time, really like instilling the protection of that free time is crucial for everyone, but especially for gifted people in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Very good advice. Unstructured time and self-care is super important. It really is. And I think throughout the pandemic, maybe more people are realizing that than before. But for some gifted kids, they put so much pressure on themselves, especially those who are perfectionists, and it hurts their bodies, it hurts their minds, and it's not a joyous way to live at all. So the earlier you can help instill those practices, the better. Kendra.
Well, a few things. So I guess the first one would be to make sure that you're creating or allowing your child to even create experiences for themselves. We didn't have a lot of money, but if I came to my mom with something like, that was free or cheap or, some kind of a game plan, like she never told me no on it. Like, she would make sure I had a ride there or whatever, even if she didn't understand it, even if, she didn't think I should do it, she still allowed me to try. And trying things allowed me to fail at things, and not just academics. Encourage them to, they're smart. We know they're smart, but encourage them to do activities that, aren't academic related. I was on the academic team at school from 4th grade to my senior year. And it was something that I truly loved. It gave me confidence. Future problem solving team allowed me to, think creatively, which I was not allowed to do at school. But don't just have them in a box of, you're smart, so you do smart things. You read books, you hang out with smart kids, whatever. My mom made sure I was outside the box. I played sports. I, tried stuff I wasn't good at, and it helped me to develop some resilience, because I fail at stuff all the time. Like, I apply for jobs and I don't get them, even as an adult. Like, I'm able to roll with the punches of a failure, because I failed so much as a kid. And even academically, like, I remember getting an F on my report card in 7th grade English. I went on to get a journalism degree. Like, I'm good at English. I'm a good writer. I'm a great writer, but my mom was like, all right, first of all, you're going to do whatever you didn't do to earn this F, but tell me why you got an F. And it was, well, I didn't think that the assignment was worth doing. Like, I didn't see the purpose of it.
Yeah.
And just, being able to let them fail and talking them through it. The other thing I would say is to recognize that if you do not figure out how to help your child, if you do not figure out, what it means to be gifted, if you don't explore those things, your child as a gifted student is at risk of all kinds of things. Research shows that, this population is more at risk for drug and alcohol abuse, for, suicidal ideation, all of those things. And that's not to scare anyone, but it's a misunderstood population, and that feeling of being misunderstood and not having outlets to, explore who you are and to, develop your talents, it puts us at risk. I was in 6th grade when I started drinking at school, like bringing wine in a Sprite bottle, drinking at my locker in between classes because I was bored out of my mind and just defiant and, looking for ways to do whatever. So, my mom had no clue, and I think that she's no longer here, but I don't think she ever knew that. I never got caught, but I was rebelling. I was trying to figure out a way to get through the day. So just being aware of those risks that are there for your child, and making sure that you are keeping a close eye on them, making sure that you're doing pulse checks. How are things going? Just keeping a good eye on it. I didn't realize that this was an at-risk population until, I went on to become a school counselor and a social worker myself. So I know that my mom had no clue that was something that I might struggle with or whatever. But, it's just something to really pay attention to.
Sure is. Great advice, Kendra. Wake?
Yeah, I'd say that I have a few, trying
Sure.
not to be repetitive, right? Because these are such good, this is also true.
We're driving the point home. You can.
Yeah, exactly. I loved what was said earlier. I don't know if it's Carmen that you said it, that parents have to be hungry like their kids to enable them. And I think that is so true. But what I would put with it is that no matter what, I think as a parent of a gifted child, you're going to wish you'd done more. But what you do helps. Right. And so, like, even if you only have 30 minutes one day a week, even if you can only invest 3 hours a day or 5 hours a day, if you can invest your whole day, whatever it is, all of it is noticed by the child, I think, especially if you're doing it with them, and it matters. So invest what you can is what I would say. And then along with that, there's a lot of systems around us that make things challenging at times. JCPS is, I think, as Victoria said, way more resourced. Man, I would have loved to have the resource, but it's still, but the flip side of it is a giant bureaucracy as well. And it's got a job to do, and you have to sometimes be the squeaky wheel. So speak up, be an advocate, push into the system. Because the one thing that is true is that this is a system of educators who want your child to succeed. It's just a system of educators that is supposed to help all children succeed, which is a very difficult proposition when you're dealing with special needs children, such as gifted. And to the extent that money or something is a barrier to your child doing something, I would go so far as to encourage you to just ask. My parents didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I was shocked to find out that I was able to do my first year at Vampy because my mom literally went door to door to organizations in our town and raised the money. She just asked. And she pulled together like $1,500, $2,000 from local community organizations in $20, $50 checks across the town to do that. And I would have, without that role model, I don't think I would have ever realized that that was possible. So there is money and support out there that wants to see your child succeed. You just gotta, sometimes you have to push through to get that. So I encourage that. And then I also really liked the other statement that said that you said, Tracy, about kids needing idea mates. Again, I think we've all touched on this a little bit, like especially those of us from smaller towns. There weren't as many people like us. We didn't realize we weren't necessarily connected. And for me, like the moment that I went to a place like Vampy that had all these people that were like me was just a revelation. It was like, oh my gosh. Not only was it a revelation, it was a revelation that for me took a lot of pressure off because I wasn't the smartest kid there. And that felt great for me. I was like, thank God, right? Like I really needed that personally. And so to the extent you can is connect them with those idea mates. If you can find those people, ask other teachers who else is advanced, they'll teach each other. Like they really will, and you'll take off and do that. And finally, the last little point is, embrace your kids, in their success and their failure. I think we've touched on that. Like we screw things up. Like I failed my first test in college, right? After skating by, because I never had to work in high school, right? And for me, that was a gift because it like woke me up and it was like, okay, I gotta start doing things differently now. But there are failures like that along the way that we experience particularly harshly, I think, as gifted kids, and just embrace us in those times. And that's really the tool that helps us drive forward through everything and become, I think, the adults that we can.
Great, thank you so much. You hit on so many good points. And I do want to call out for those of you involved in the center, the idea mates, that's a Dr. Julia phrase there. So I'll give her credit for that. Victoria, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. I'll just add something short. Just to echo what Wake said, everyone on the panel pretty much did a great summary of what you can do to support your gifted child. I feel like I'm like connecting with a lot of ideal mates right now. It's been a long quarantine. I think also a big thing for, again, just speaking from personal experience, it's something that I think I've heard echoed from some of my friends, people that I've had like gifted education experiences with, is I think it's also really important to understand that like you don't just have to be gifted in these like set aside worlds, right? Like there's a certain point where you do, where kind of like what Wake was saying, Vampy very much was a very different reality than what I lived, the other 49 weeks out of the year or whatever. And that can be very heady and exciting, right? But I think also it's very important to conceptualize like and impress upon like a gifted child that like they carry that into the world with them too, right? And so like how is that oriented? Like I think for me, like I think my giftedness ended up just being, I think, like blanket leadership. Because I again like was not the smartest person in my classrooms. Even in my tiny public school in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, never the smartest person in the classroom. And so like I think though like understanding you carry those with you, like it's not just for specific environments, but it's also how to be appropriate in these other environments, right? And add it to your life, because it's not something that has to be cloistered away. I think there's really is this sense of like we, just to speak more broadly, don't live in a culture that values education or teachers, you know what I mean? Or like people that really care about child development in general, and so like I think that's something you kind of have to remember and carry with you, because a lot of even like through like I have 3 degrees at this point, like even for people who are really smart, you don't always see the passion there, or like the appreciation for learning, or like having this communal sense, right? And that was something I felt almost betrayed by, you know, and I went to law school and I was like, you guys aren't just in awe that we have all of these, you know, like experts or whatever that we can talk to. And no. And so that was something I was like, okay, like, you know, kind of have to cabin that expectation, right? And so I think in terms of like, it goes back to, you know, like understanding yourself, having a foundation, having confidence to be a different type of thinker, which a lot of times means being a different type of person. Like being able to give like your child like the context, like clues to be able to navigate that through the rest of their life, I think will only enrich like the spaces they have that are designated to be specifically for like gifted studies or whatever, right? Because it's not something you have to hide. Like that's something, I'm 27 and I like have just recently started opening up to my friends about what I consider some of my nerdier hobbies, right? And it's something that gives me a lot of joy, and like I like feel the most understood by like by my romantic partner, my fiance, you know, it's something like I came into my gifted awareness more so as an adult in terms of like being able to concretely say, this is how I want to carry this part of my identity, because it is part of your identity, just like, you know, Trace was saying at the beginning. And so I think maybe that's the biggest lesson I've learned as a gifted person, gifted, like former gifted child, whatever, you know, is that like, you don't have to necessarily trim that down and like the rest of your life, right? You know, you can carry that with you. And I think like there is some reticence to do that just because of how we view education as this society. But it's something that I think it can only help to your to your confidence, like your children's confidence, you know, in terms of being a gifted person. And also it has the plus side of hopefully making things better society wise, culture wise, more gifted people being who they are. So we can only hope. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, gosh, I wish it's taped, and I'm so glad it's taped because you guys have had tremendous insight into things. And I want to point out, because several of you mentioned Vampy, and for the audience, the Center for Gifted Studies offers residential and non-residential camps in the summertime. This year, they're just going to be residential because of COVID. We're not going to bring outside in, you know, day by day, but they are expensive, but we have financial aid. And CAGE, the Kentucky Association for Gifted Education, we have financial aid. We do not want a single child who needs to come to Vampy or SCATS not be able to do that.
CAGE
So, yeah, definitely. Well, and I'm going to brag on Wake. He actually volunteered as a counselor one summer, and that paid for his sister to go to Vampy, which is pretty awesome. That's a good brother. So parents, if you're interested in some of those opportunities, you can go to wku.edu/gifted, and that can give you information. Jesse Thompson will also have access to that information. And I think it's going to be a while before I fall asleep tonight, because you guys have you've got me going here. And you talked about those kindred spirits. That's kind of what I call them, those idea mates. You know, when you connect with somebody, I'm the exact same Myers-Briggs as you are, Kendra, and we're like the smallest percentage in, you know, so it's kind of fun. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate it. And Jesse, I'm going to turn it over to you.